You guys have been asking questions about my daily, the Shorty here behind me. So today we're going over the full build as well as the backstory behind it. Hey guys, Myer Power Driven Diesel here. You guys have been asking about my daily, the Shorty. That is what is behind me right here. It is a 1995 Dodge Ram regular cab short bed that was never produced. So originally the frame got chopped and it got grafted together, and it was two-wheel drive, and it was a 12 valve and it was a manual transmission. So we auto swapped it with a full manual valve body, and then they got 12 valve, and then it got a 5.9 common rail, and that was a blast for a long time. Then I hurt that engine, so we built a 6.7 common rail for it, and then we decided to go a little extra, and we ended up putting a Duramax four-wheel drive chassis under there. We did that so it could be low with the IFS and still be four-wheel drive, and that is how it sits today. It is an absolute riot. And so today we're gonna go over just a full walk around, show you what's in the truck, show you what's under the truck, and kind of talk about the story. So the first thing you'll notice about this thing is it's a little bit hammered. I mean, since I bought it, it has lost a lot of paint. I've got another body I want to put on it, and so I just need to make the time to do it. I would just paint it, but it's got rust on the doors. I want to just go through and do some body work to this thing and kind of get it back to its former glory. Another thing you'll notice is that the grill got bashed in. I was hauling this thing and the junker drag truck, and the tailgate opened on the junker and it bashed in my grill. And then on the next trip where I was hauling two trucks, I had it behind Scrat, and this truck came loose and ran into the back of Scrat. So I also bashed in my bumper a little bit too. So kind of unfortunate on my sweet sport front end, but it is what it is. It's not exactly a show truck anyway, so really that's not even the first thing you notice. Everyone always wants to know, what is my wheel and tire setup? I don't actually know. I think those are called moto metals. I just know they're like one of the most basic, at least 5 years ago, they were the most basic wheel and tire setup you could get. That's what the truck came with. It's what it's always had. And then it's on 305 50 20 Nito 420s, and I go through about a set of those every couple thousand miles. So it's gotten a lot of sets. It's got more sets of tires than it has oil changes. Actually, it's kind of sad, but it's pretty good. It means it's a good time. So back in its two-wheel drive Dodge frame life, it had a fuel cell in here because the frame was shortened between the fuel tank mounts. And so the only way to do it was to put a fuel cell in the bed. That worked great, but it kind of limited your already limited bed room. So when we did the Duramax frame, we kept the factory Duramax tank, which means I now got a full freaking bed space in here. So ever since then, we've nicknamed this thing the work truck, because, you know, it's got a full 6-foot bed. Like, what more do you want? Now, the fine print on this thing, which that's another project that needs to happen, it needs some airbags because it's so close to the bump stops and the rear end is so soft. There it is. It needs airbags and bump stops. So the Shorty has always had two signature looks. Look number one is that the exhaust is loose, so it'll just drag on the ground. It's just always been like that. I've tried to tighten it up and I just kind of stopped caring. The other thing is that there's just rubber pelted on the whole side of the truck. And I mean, as you can see, like there's just rubber caked on this thing. Like in the fender liner, you can get a full handful pretty easily. And that's just the Shorty for you. It enjoys doing that. I mean, that's pretty much it for the outside of the truck. It's a fun truck. It is so much fun to drive. Like every time I do something, like the 6.7 one is great. The 4-wheel drive is just a whole nother level. It's so much fun. First, we're jumping under the hood here. We've got one of our 6.7 common rail engines. This is a Street Fighter. It's got one of our Colt Stage 4 cam in it. It's got arch valve springs, our push rods, one of our ported heads. You guys actually, if you go back and look, we did stock to ported head testing, and that was on this truck back when it was a two-wheel drive, but we did it on this engine here. That was all with single turbos and stuff. We have since gone to a compound turbo setup. The old 5.9 engine had a 351 HT4B turbo setup. It ran pretty good. An HT4B is like basically an old school whole sets version of a 480, but either way, it ran okay. But we've upgraded since with the 6.7. We can drive turbo so much harder. So we're using a 467 on the manifold with one of our Aggressor 98s on the atmosphere. Normally, when you do a compound setup like this, you have to go side by side. A big old GT55 base charger doesn't fit over under. However, because Duramax framed things, that was the only way I was able to get it to fit. And so it's kind of like weird to see such a big setup over under, but that's what's down there. We got a GT55, and this thing rips. It runs so freaking good. It makes around 1,500 horse. I haven't downloaded it, but it's a similar setup to what Todd has, and he does mid 1,500. So it's probably around a 1,500 horsepower truck, but on the street, it'll clean up 1,200 horse, no problem at all. Like squeaky clean, and it rips. And as the windshield and the sides both show, this thing's got DDP fueling in it. This is the first set of injectors I ever bought from them, and it went very well, so I just kept going with all my rigs. But it's got a set of their 200% overs, and it's got one of their 12 mils with just a factory 6.7 pump up on the belt. So it's a dual pump setup. It runs pretty darn good. It does really well. Also, something you'll notice is the intake horn here. It's very common to like peel your paint on your intake pipes on the hot side of the intercooler because, you know, it's making 700-degree air over there. It's common. When you do it on the cold side of the intercooler, you know you're down to party, because I did that in a burnout competition. I was sitting on the limiter for probably about a minute or so, and it just heat soaked the whole engine so freaking bad. And yeah, it speckled the paint. So that is another thing I want to do, is I want to take all the piping and turbos off and get them powder coated. That way they just look clean. This is an old, this is actually a customer returned CAC pipe that it got dented in shipping and returned it. So I kind of used that. And that's why that little section there is red. It's because I just used the scraps I had to make this compound kit. And so it runs really well. But I want it to look a little better at some point. Another thing we've done to the truck recently is it started out as an 05 ECM, which is an 848. So I used an MM3 to tune it, and it was good, but I wanted it just the same as everything else, all my other rigs. And so I went with an 849. And so I ended up 849 swapping it, doing all that wiring. But one of the main reasons we decided to do that is so now I have a bona fide staging limiter. And so I have a button that I can hit that when hit that button, it gives me a programmable staging limiter. So I have it set to about 2,400 RPM. That way, when I'm sitting at a line like dirt dragging or anything, I can sit there on the limiter. And then the moment I let off the brake, it does it. And that's how I have it set up, is I have my staging limiter button is on the brake pedal. So when you're on the brake, it limits you in RPM. The moment you come off, it lets it go full steam ahead. And that works really well. And so that's how I have that set up. So another thing I get a lot of questions about is the brake system on this thing, especially now that it's a Duramax frame with 3rd gen some parts and 2nd gen others. So just to kind of go over what I've got going on is I'm using just a full 3rd gen hydro boost setup, full master cylinder, hydro booster, all that stuff. And 2 of the 4 holes line up perfectly in the firewall. And so that locates it. You just mark out your other 2, re-drill them. You gotta do a little bit of grinding to the bracket to get around some rivets and stuff. But that way it's a full 3rd gen hydro boost. I like the 3rd gen because it's a little more tucked. A 2nd gen one would be out to here, and it's just hard to work on things and whatever else. And then from there, you're just gonna use I used a 3rd gen, so that's actually a 4th gen. It's a 2010 style power steering pump. They seem to do really good at the higher RPM. I've tried some 3rd gens. They're hit and miss. Some work, some don't. The 2010, the upgraded style, seems to do really good. Then you just use your factory 3rd gen lines, because you're using a 3rd gen booster, 3rd gen power steering, no problem there. And then for the brake system, you guys can actually come in here. I've just got a Willwood proportioning valve. My front and rears go in, and then my rear comes out, and then these are my 2 fronts that go to the 2 front tires. So that kind of makes it work fairly well. And then yeah, and then as far as a power steering cooler, 2002 1500 cooler, it bolts to the cross member pretty easily. It works well, and that way I've just got it going between the steering gear, through the cooler, and then back to the power steering reservoir. Another thing is all the factory electronics. Obviously, we've got a 2nd gen dash in there. How do we make all those sensors still read? Some of them do, some of them don't. I've lost a couple actually in some recent changes, and I'll bring them back eventually. But the main one is the tach. I need a tach signal, that way my AC can work, which doesn't work currently, but it used to work. And I need a tach signal for the couple other reasons. Back when the 2nd gen PCM was charging the alternator. It is what it is. Anyway, so what I did there is I'm running just a factory 2nd gen PCM still, so it can still control the cluster, but I'm using a the factory 2nd gen 12 valve engine speed sensor, and I've put 2 magnets in the back of the dual pump pulley, and so it's picking up actually the dual pump pulley RPM, and I've got a little machined into the dual pump bracket, and so it's actually just picking up the like I say, that CP3 pulley, and that's how it's getting the tach signal. And that works pretty well. I've seen people, and this is actually really clever, they machine the back of a 2nd gen damper to run the 3rd gen tone ring, and that way they can have the notches in the damper to read the tach on, as well as the tone ring to be able to pick up for the comm rail side. That works well. I wanted to run a fluid damper, so that didn't work out for me, but that's also a really good way of doing it. So what we got here, people always like, oh, it's got cool like racing bucket seats. They were in it when I bought it. Don't know the brand, don't know anything about it. I have put it through its paces a good amount. They aren't the most comfortable to road trip in, but they're actually kind of nice because they're so bucketed that you can just like scoot your butt a little bit, and it really changes like the pressure points in your butt, and so it makes it so you don't get as sore of a butt. Like obviously it's not a massaging seat or anything, but it gets you pretty close. From there we have a full manual valve body shifter. This was my early work, and you can see we're actually missing a bolt there. It's not exactly my finest work. It's actually not my work at all. This is Josh McCormick, okay? If you want to see his early fab work, there you go. Also, a couple different pressure gauges here. We got lift pump, we've got engine oil pressure, and we've got transmission line pressure. That was before we had the transmission line pressure gauge and stuff. So the reason I have engine oil pressure in this thing is because my first 5.9 comm rail I built, it would kick the oil pressure light on when it was hot and I would idle. And it always made me nervous because I'm like, how much pressure does it actually have? So I put the gauge in. Turns out it was idling at like 8 or so PSI, which is still above the factory spec. And everyone's like, oh, what are you gonna do to fix it? I'm like, I don't know, it still runs, like let it be. Turns out the engine blew up, had nothing to do with low oil pressure, so I was right, it was fine. Anyway, not really the takeaway, but it survived. But yeah, otherwise it's pretty basic in here. It's actually got, it's not a uncracked dash, but it's not too bad. I don't really like to check because it is, like in my brain, it's not really cracked, so I want to keep it that way. And this is actually the lowest mileage vehicle I own. It's got 199,000 miles. So everything else I have is over 400,000. So that's not too bad. As you can see, we have the full manual valve body, or a manual transmission hole in there. I ended up patching that just when the cab was up. So I need to put new carpet in this thing because this carpet is hammered, but it's just there's always something to do and something I want to make better. So if it's not performance, it generally gets put to the back burner. I also put a 4-wheel drive shifter in this thing. I never screwed it down. This was all trying to hurry up and get to a burnout competition. But now I got 4-wheel drive. That's pretty cool. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward. We got the switch on the dash. In case anyone's wondering, doesn't do anything. It just sits there. I think it was for like fog lights or something a long time ago, but those are just tied in with the headlights now. So yeah, we also got this super sweet headliner, which started falling down about 2 months ago. So I need to figure out what I need to do to glue that up. You guys have suggestions on that, I am down for ideas. But yeah, pretty straightforward, pretty simple. And it gets you from point A to point B. So now starting underneath, one of our more recent modifications we made recently was the new shock mounts. If you guys are familiar with the Duramax front shock or rear shocks, the brackets were really flimsy, and so they're actually bent already on mine. And the factory perches are pretty low, and so when I lowered the rear end, because I lowered the rear end of this truck, the Duramax frame, I think it was like a combined like 10 or 11 inches. And so there's like 7 inches of the perches moving up, and then everything else was just with cutting springs to make the leaf pack softer. That being said, it just made it so the shock had to be really, really short. And so I ended up just kind of moving things around to run a longer shock. That way I have still good suspension travel. And so I made these perches for the axle side, which turned out pretty darn well. And I made new perches for the top as well. They sit on the frame. So now we moved the top of the shock up from where it was, and then the bottom of the shock moved down. And so, like, again, it lets us run just a factory shock. That way I'm not doing some custom anything. If I ever blow out a shock on the road or something, or in 5 years, I can just buy another shock from Napa or wherever I want to buy them from and, keep on going. So that worked out. I also made the traction bar mounts. These are kind of extra, but I wanted to drop that traction bar link because I wanted that traction bar to be at an uphill. that helps with your anti-squat. So if you're launching and before the traction bar was pointing downhill, which means that it tries to get the bed to get, it tries to make it so the bed and the axle, get closer together, which means that when you launch, the weight's going to go on the rear axle. And so if you do nothing, the rear end just is going to squat and go. Well, if it squats too hard, it ends up just bottoming out your suspension, and that just causes problems. So I knew it was going to do that. So I wanted to get an upward rake towards the traction bar, which helps with your anti-squat. So it kind of helps fight that motion of the bed coming down, which just helps plant the axle a little bit better, makes it so it doesn't just launch. So it's not like, I want to say violent. It's like, it's not fast. It's just compressing suspension instead of actually moving. Anyway, so we did that. That was cool. And then it's a little extra because we have a strap point here. I'm going to run a bolt through that, and that way I can hook on with a strap. So when I'm strapping on the truck, I can go, and then I have a second Heim joint system set up here. So I can run another Heim and have it come up to the frame rail, so that way I can brace it. That way, inevitably, when I sled pull this truck, because why not, I can brace the rear of the frame, because I have C-notches where I lowered the suspension so much. So brings us to the next topic, where we C-notch the frame. The factory Duramax frame is 8 inches tall. It's quite a tall frame. A factory second gen is actually 5.5. And so ultimately what I did is I did some measuring, and I wanted the frame to hit at basically the same time as the tire hits the fender. And so that's what we did. So now we got it C-notched about 2.5 inches, so it's down to a 5.5 inch section. So now the axle hits the frame at the same time, or makes it so I can, have full suspension travel and not bottoming out early. Because that was the whole goal, is I wanted this thing to be low, but I wanted it to drive good on the street. I didn't want to sit there and hit the bump stops on any kind of bump. So the suspension is kind of soft to where it kind of still happens if I have anything in the bed, but I'm going to put some airbags in it, and that will really help just firm them up a little bit. But I can still drop them down when I'm trying to look cool. But going around town, I can just put a 10, 20 PSI in there, make it ride a little bit higher so it doesn't bottom the bump stops all the time. But that's that. So one of my favorite parts about the swap that we did with the Duramax frame is I kept the factory fuel tank. Before, like I said, it was in the bed of the truck, just a fuel cell. Now we got a factory fuel tank, so I got full bed space again, and it freaking fits. It actually fits really well. So the only really hard part about it was that the front tank mount, like as I was setting the cab down, it's like smack dab in the middle of the cab. So I had to like cut it down the center and plate it. So now it's like a half moon, or a half like a D-shaped instead of a round tubing. But hey, it works. It runs fine. So yeah, that's all it was. Otherwise, it was basically just bolt-in, didn't have to change anything, which was really cool. So next thing was the torsion bar mounts. I wanted this thing to be like factory suspension, so I didn't want to do like coilovers or anything in the front, which I don't know if that was a good decision or not, but that's what I did. And so I was just wanting to run the factory torsion bars. Well, factory torsion bar mount would have worked, and it would have gone underneath the transfer case. Problem with that is that anytime you want to pull a transmission, you have to then pull the transfer case off separate, and that makes it really difficult, especially when you do this stuff by yourself, which most of the time when I'm pulling this stuff, it's by myself. So I wanted to redesign this thing to go over the transfer case. So you can see that's what we did. We just got some lasered out plates that will go up and over. It has our key mounts and all that stuff in there. So it still basically works like factory, but it goes over top. And you can see we have a slight rubbing issue with the exhaust, but at least we know who to blame here. So if you look at this really quick, we have the exhaust fabricator himself, Will Terry Fabrication. But yeah, that's how that worked out. And then similar story with the transmission mount here. I wanted to run the factory Dodge mount. I know there's other options out there. I just wanted it to be simple, so I ran the factory Dodge mount with a new cross member I just made. It's got tangs that go to the frame rails. You pop the bolts out. It's kind of like trying to mimic a 3rd gen setup. Pop the bolts out, slide the cross member out, and you're good to go. So that worked out pretty darn well there too. Another question I'm sure you guys are going to have, which I was very curious myself, being 4-wheel drive and a Shorty, how long are the drive shafts? So the rear drive shaft, U-joint center to center, is 34 inches. The front drive shaft, center to center, is 33 inches. So it's basically the same length drive shaft front and back. So now we have actually a pretty ironic problem. So as you can see, we got a little bit of oil buildup here, and I've kind of looked in to see where the oil leak is coming from, and I believe it's coming from the drain plug on the pan, which is like one of the most simple things to fix. However, if you look at our situation we have here, I can't actually get at it. So I need to make a little like a skeletonized version of this, or modify it slightly so I can actually drain the oil on this truck. That'll be a problem for another like 3,000 miles or so. But You can see just with trying to shoehorn a common rail or a Cummins into this frame, we were pretty tight in what we could do. So we tried to make it as low as we could without modifying anything, as well as we're really freaking close. If you look in here to this differential, we're both like close on the side there, we're close on the top. I basically want this thing as low and as far to the driver's side as possible, and so this is kind of where we stuck it. So the next thing was the motor mounts. People are like asking me, why didn't I just use a, you know, de-stroked, or there's a couple companies that make motor mounts for putting a Cummins into a Duramax chassis, like why don't I use them? Two reasons. First of all, those motor mounts are designed to put a Cummins in a Duramax truck, a Chevy. I'm trying to just put it in a Duramax frame with a second gen Dodge. So I was like, I don't know where that's going to put the engine, and that's going to be where I want the engine. Second of all, I wanted this thing to, it's my daily. I wanted to, like, I didn't want to sacrifice, I mean, I'm sure it's lightweight or whatever. I just didn't want to sacrifice any kind of harmonics or anything. Like, factory made a big old bushing, and it works really good at dampening the vibrations of the engine. I didn't want to use any pucks or anything. I wanted it to be factory. So what I ended up doing is I had a couple brackets lasered out and bent, so it cradles the motor mounts on both sides. I'm just using a second gen VP. Actually, these are 12 valve motor mounts, but you can use a VP motor mount, which fits around the ECM better. But just a second gen motor mount, and then I just made cradles that got welded onto the frame. Did a couple cross braces, and it worked out pretty well. And that way I was able to fully control where that engine's at. So next off, we have the steering. Everyone wonders, like, oh, Duramax problems, you know, with the whole front end issues. What did I do to fix that? So I don't actually know. A buddy or friend shop of ours, I talked to them and they gave me links and showed me part numbers for things to buy. I don't remember if it was Cognito or if it was Kryptonite, but I basically, you know, swiped my card on the whole kit. We've got all the braces, all the arms, all the heavy duty, whatever. So it was a good chunk in steering components, but it's been pretty good. We've done, you know, some pretty good launches and stuff, four-wheel drive, like off the hit, spinning them all, and it's taken it just fine. And then we're just using OEM CV joints, and so far, or the CV axles, and those are working just fine so far. So also we had to figure out the cab mounts. That was actually very straightforward because the Duramax cabs are considerably, like, the mounting points are wider than the second gen. The second gen frame's narrower, so the cab mounts are narrower as well. And so all I had to do is take all the cab mounts and chop them off that Duramax frame. And then I just had to chop, you know, like 1/4 inch to 1.5 inches off the mount, like figure out which ones I wanted to put where, get them mounted up, weld them up, and that was it. That was very straightforward. And then I just like kind of located the bed, located the cab, loaded because you have rubber bushing it's sitting on. So I wanted to load the cab mount a little bit, and then just do a couple tack welds and measure everything, move them around, whatever needed to happen. And so yeah, that part was very straightforward. And I just reused all the metal brackets from the factory, and then I used the second gen pucks, and they fit in the brackets just fine. So that actually worked out really well. And then people see a line lock and they're like, what is that for? Well, it's for doing burnouts. When you're doing a burnout and you can lock out the rear brakes for the burnout, it really, really helps. So you don't burn up your brakes, and not having to push through the load of the brakes as well. You can sit there at like 100 and some miles an hour at like 1100 degree GTs, no problem. And it can sustain that for a lot longer than if you're having to push through those brakes. So that's what that is. It worked out pretty well. Just goes, kills the signal going in line to the rear. And then on the transmission side, currently what we have is a 48RE married to a 271 manual shift transfer case from like a third gen. I went with the 273 because a 273 will work either behind a 48, or you can have it work behind a 68 as well. So if I ever wanted to put a 68 RFE in this truck, all I'd have to do is build one, bolt it in, and just figure out some kind of controller. But either way, it's giving me options for something I might want to do in the future. Also, I want to do a huge shout out to AirDog. This is the AirDog 5G220. It's the exact same pump that I have in my tow truck, and it's the same pump I have in my race truck. It works great. And so that's obviously what we went with on this fuel system. It's got the boost regulated fuel pressure, so that way once you start making boost, it bumps it up higher. And it's just a really good combination for these common rails with bigger pumps where they're kind of picky with fuel pressure, but you don't want it to dip down too far under power. So that works great. We just welded a little tab on their bracket here, and we're running a regulator, so that way it's just all kind of self-contained. All I have to do is feed it a boost source, and it ramps up when it should. So if you guys are still here and you just got done watching all the why would you ever do all this crap stuff, let me go into the backstory of this truck a little bit. So originally, Josh McCormick bought the truck. I think he actually traded a CTSV for it. He sold it to a coworker, and then that coworker was looking to get something else. He was looking to sell, and I was like, you know what? I think I want to buy this truck. And the reason I wanted to buy it is because that was back in 2019, and Josh had his 6-point grate, and it was hurting engines, it was hurting transmissions, it was just hurting everything. I mean, back then we had much less stuff figured out, and that was like really the start of our high performance street truck journey, where we're trying to learn how to get these things to survive. And my brain was like, if I want a fun daily, I don't want to have to work on it all the time. So it has to be reliable, but I also want to make a good amount of power. And so I was like, if I could do it in a light, regular cab short bed, not only is that awesome for just putzing around town, darting to the gas station or grocery store or whatever, but it's also super light to where it would last longer. And being 2-wheel drive, I couldn't put it in 4-wheel drive and hurt something. So I was like, oh, this is perfect. So I had it as a 12 valve. We full manual valve body auto swapped it because it was a manual under Josh's ownership, and that was a blast. It made about 550 horse. From there, I mobbed that for a while, and I knew I wanted to push it further. Josh was doing these dyno events, and I was like, man, it would be really cool to have a truck that could actually compete in these dyno classes. And so I was like, okay, I know I can build a 12 valve to be super streetable, because I'm all about goal setting. I want this truck to be an amazing daily. That was priority number one. And so I didn't want to sacrifice that on at all. And so I was like, I can make 800 horse 12 valve drive awesome on the street, super clean, peppy, fun, or I have to common rail swap it if I want to make 1,000 horsepower. And that's what I want to do, is I want to make 1,000 horsepower, because if I could do that in a small compound class, I could be very, very competitive. So I ended up making the decision to common rail swap it. So I bought a bunch of Josh's old stuff from his race truck. He had common rail swapped, and so that was the engine, that was the harness, that was ECM, and that's what we ended up putting into this thing. And that was a riot. The first day out, we common rail swapped it on a weekend, and then the next weekend we went to the Gauntlet Challenge, and it made 1,065 with just whatever parts we had bolted onto it, which I mean, huge win. I'd never made, I think my highest at that point was like 700 of my 12 valve tow truck. And so we bumped right up to that 1,065 number. And that was a blast. That was so much fun. Well, then I wanted more. I wanted more. I wanted more. And it got to the point where I had to decide if I wanted to ruin the truck by putting bigger turbos on it that weren't going to run as good, or if I wanted to just leave it alone and actually do the race truck things with an actual race truck. So that's where Scrat came along, and I decided I wanted it to be 4-wheel drive race truck, and that way I could put the big turbos and terrible street manners in it, keep this thing quicker spooling and keep it fun. And so that's what happened. This kind of got put to the wayside because I was working on other things. But all that being said, moving on, we had a 5.9 in here. Well, then I had a couple other trucks, so I didn't have to daily drive this one anymore. So I started playing with single turbos. I put a single GT55 on this thing, put it on a dyno, and over revved it and blew up the engine. And so people wonder, why did I go from a 5.9 to a 6.7? Well, I had blown up the 5.9 engine, and 5.9 blocks aren't as strong. 6.7 blocks are way stronger. If they were the same, I probably would have put a 5.9 back in it, just because it was a blast with how it was. But 6.7 blocks are stronger, and they drive nice. They just make so much torque. Like it is a great time. So I ended up putting a 6.7 into it, and then I drove that for a while. I grenaded the rear end, all that stuff. That was fun. I swapped the Dana 80 in there, and that was great. But we went to the Junction airstrip with the Shorty as a 2-wheel drive, and we had this big old slicks we put on there, and it just wasn't like Josh and Todd were both going down the drag strip with their 4-wheel drive vehicles and then running, well into the 6s. And I was out there with high 7s, just knowing I could do so much better. I mean, that's a 700 horsepower truck territory in high 7s. With my lightweight vehicle, like I should be able to do so much better, but 2-wheel drive, I was spinning the whole way. And I was just like, it was fun, but I wanted more. I wanted to be able to hook up whenever, wherever, like even on the street, or if someone wanted to race, I'm like, yeah, if I do this from a dig, a 700 horsepower 4-wheel drive truck will beat me. And so it was just, I wanted to be 4-wheel drive, but regular cab short beds, in my opinion, only look good if they're low. I've seen a couple like lifted ones or stock height ones and 4-wheel drive. They're not great. And that's why so many of them are 2-wheel drive, is because they only really look good low. And so I knew I wanted to keep it low, but I really wanted 4-wheel drive. And so when we went to UCC and we pitted with a Dirty Hooker diesel, I saw their truck, and it kind of just gave me a spark of saying, like, I could do that. I could make it 4-wheel drive with independent front suspension if I used a Duramax front end. And then I started thinking about it more. I'm like, let me just use the whole Duramax frame. So that's what we ended up doing. I kind of got a hair at my butt. I wanted to do it for a burnout competition in Arizona this spring, And so 5 weeks from the event, I started the process. I acquired an old, it was a 2008 Duramax silver, like a Silverado, whatever, 2500. I stripped the cab off of it. I stripped the frame down. I shortened it up. And in 5 weeks, I had it from driving it on the street to driving it on the street. That's what we ended up doing. And it actually, I mean, I think it turned out really, really well. There's definitely some quirks I'm still working on. The fact that it's slow low, I need to work on some of the suspension stuff so it doesn't bottom out like driving around town. But it is a blast, and that's why we did it. And this truck has always been the like take it out, people out for test drives and stuff. And that was something that was always frustrating. Is like, you know, people are like, oh, it makes like 1,000 horse. Like, oh, I can't wait. That's gotta be outrageous. And you go on the street and you can't put any of it down. Like, I'm not gonna go 100 miles an hour with like someone else in the passenger seat, like, because that's the only mile an hour you can get it to all hook up at. So you're stuck at like 40, 50, 60, and it's just spinning, and so it doesn't feel that great. Well, with four-wheel drive now, it's so much fun to take people for rides because they have no idea what's about to happen. Like, even like people that think they're in like have been in fast cars just don't have, unless it's an all-wheel drive car, those cars exist, but most cars that people have been in don't have all-wheel drive and can't like plant you in the seat like something like this. And so it is a blast. So that's what I currently have. It's currently runs around in about a 1200 horsepower tune, which is enough to spin them all in second, but third gear it'll hook. It's so much fun to both drive and take people for rides in. And so that's kind of what it is. It's somewhat of a daily driver. I don't drive it every single day, but I drove it this morning. I've driven it, I don't know, a couple times in the last week or so. And so it is a blast. It is fun, and it's so much fun to take people for rides in. And that's probably one of the main reasons I do it. So we had a couple customers that came by in the last couple weeks, and I took them for rides, and it's always so rewarding, so much fun just to see like the smile on their face. And they just like, you know, because once you've been in the truck enough, you should plant your body against the seat to prepare for the launch. But like if it's your first time, you're just like kind of lean forward like you normally would be and just get planted back there. It's so much fun. So yeah, that is the build, and that is kind of why we did it, and that's why it's kind of progressed the way it is. Would I do it again? I mean, I guess if I had enough time in my life to do it a second time, I might do it again. But either way, it's definitely one of a kind. I do really enjoy doing things against the grain, not just doing what everyone else does. And so that's probably also another reason why the truck is what it is. So guys, I think that's basically it. I think I've covered most of the questions I've gotten about Conrail swaps and the Duramax frame swap. But if I did miss anything, let me know in the comments. If you have questions, I'll try to do my best to go down there and look at them and see what I missed and see if I can get you guys some answers. But make sure to hit that like button, go in, share with your friends, and smash that subscribe button, because doing all that stuff really helps support the channel and helps us make more videos just like this one. Thanks, guys.